Greetings. We've got a lot of questions that ask you to evaluate the extent to which.
To what extent may I play Fortnite today?
None! So, what I thought we would do today is talk about what that means. What does that mean to critically evaluate or beat it, or to evaluate the extent to which? So here's what it means. In some ways, that type of evaluating is no different from just your everyday discussing. It's really asking you to delve into the meaning of something, and by its nature, you're actually then evaluating. To what extent just gives you free rein to show your insight and your knowledge on something. So to what extent is really just a way of asking for your really informed opinion. In other ways, though, these questions do ask something specific. They ask for a range of responses to various historical situations. To what extent was the Great War caused by nationalism? To what extent did military prowess contribute to the success of the Mongols? To what extent do you agree or disagree with Hegel's great man theory of history? Evaluate the extent to which economic factors drove military competition or drove European competition for African colonies in the 19th century. To what extent should Ashoka Maurya be considered one of the greatest leaders in world history? So what is the range then? Well, we start with a great extent, meaning you fully agree. It's a crucial piece of our analytical framework, whatever this claim is. You agree to a great extent. You agree to some extent. That's perfectly acceptable. You agree to some extent with the statement or with that claim. And you agree to a small extent. It has no bearing on reality or on the correct interpretation of that historical situation. I would also avoid to a certain extent. Now, what's the difference between to a certain extent and to some extent? That's kind of a weak distinction, but I don't know, to a certain extent just sounds weak to me, so I would avoid that. In some ways, this type of question, which we do see quite often, is an easy one to allow you to set up your thesis, which is something we're working on, right? Because you're given the format of your question. Just make sure you stay somewhat within that format. Make sure you answer to what extent you agree or disagree, or you are answering the question. So in those to what extent questions, you absolutely must consider the other side. So to what extent do you agree or disagree with Hegel's great man theory of history? You could say something like this. Although it's true that Hegel's great man theory explains the rise of people like Julius Caesar or Napoleon, I agree with it to a small extent, because most history is caused by economic forces and not powerful individuals. Agree or disagree with it? That's a perfectly good way to start with that. That sets it up, and it tells the reader, I am going to consider that theory, but I'm just going to disagree with it, or it doesn't influence my way of thinking about history much. So you can also still get nuanced with these. Evaluate the extent to which economic factors drove European competition for African colonies in the late 19th century. Economic factors drove the scramble for Africa to some extent, in that the white man's burden itself was founded on the idea of economic as well as racial superiority. So that's to some extent. You're going to deal with both sides, and then you're going to talk about the extent to which, the range within which you believe something or other. Well, this is kind of a doozy of a sentence, but to what extent should Ashoka Maurya be considered one of the great leaders in world history? Despite his occasional cruelty, due to Akbar's powerful army, religious tolerance, effective political reform, seeing the empire triple in size and wealth, the Mughal leader should indeed be considered among the greatest world leaders to a great extent. That's kind of a funky sentence, but don't worry about that. You're answering the question clearly. You still have to understand the historical context, the historical conditions. You still have to prove your claims by all means. And so, but hopefully this helps you understand. What we're looking for is that range to a great extent, to some extent, to a small extent. If you get that question, that's what they're looking for you to answer that and evaluate that statement using the historical evidence. Have a great day.